Welcome to the new season of the Internet Herald podcast. I'm your host, Zaid, and today we got
What's up? And I'm Rish. We're back.
we got a
We're back after a long hiatus. It's gonna be interesting season today.
it's been a
Looking
brick,
forward to it.
Reish. It's been a brick, and I'm happy to bring this series back and bring different, unique perspectives on politics, philosophy, business, etc. onto the show, and we can, we'll have agreements, disagreements, discussions, debates. It's really going to be exciting this
Yeah,
season. So
yeah. I'm looking forward to all the guests which are gonna be coming on. Especially since last season it was just us. So this season, bringing in guests, bringing some new faces, seeing what else is out there. I think that's gonna make the show more interesting. Yeah, for sure. But what have you been up to, Zaid? How's everything going?
been doing great, man. Just been trying to, focus on myself. For people who don't know, I've been kind of doing dabbling in Jit-Jitsu and the martial art, and I'm not by any stretch of the word like a black belt or blue belt. But it's definitely a fun, like it's definitely challenging, and it's fun, man. It really is. And it's more of a thinking man's game than like people go in there with a wrestler mentality. You see these wrestlers going against jiu-jitsu fighters, and then their first instinct is to get the guy down on his back, right? But the thing is, jiu-jitsu guys want to be on their back, and that's where they get like most of their they want to be on the ground. They want to learn how to escape, how to get different positions. It's not just wrestling. Okay, put the guy on his back and then 1, 2, 3 and then tap. It's more like you got to make the guy tap, and I think it's really fun. So that's what I've been up to. What about you, man?
Dude, yeah. I've been reading a lot. I've been obviously working, working, school, internship, all that good stuff, and all that's been going pretty well. Yeah, but actually, so here's the thing. This is what I'll say: wrestling superior art compared to jiu-jitsu. Far superior. There's absolutely like, dude. There is no argument. There is no
Oh,
argument.
well, hold up, hold
I
up.
got a question for you.
This
I got a
coming from a
question.
wrestler too.
How many UFC fighters their base is wrestling? How many of them? How many champions have their base is wrestling? it's it's I mean, don't get me wrong, wrestling and jiu-jitsu are very close because they're both grappling arts, right?
Yeah, yeah,
And to be perfectly honest with you, the best art would basically be a combination of both wrestling and jiu-jitsu, right? You want the mentality of wrestling, right? You want the determination and the drive of which wrestlers have, and the ability to cut weight which wrestlers have, and like the sheer strength. Also, you want the technique on the back which jiu-jitsu has, right? Like jiu-jitsu alone is is good, but it's just like it's there's only so much you can do with it. Same with wrestling. Like wrestling is great. I think you can do more with wrestling than with jiu-jitsu because like we see that there's like applications of it, but the ideal art is combining both, which is kind of what sambo is, right? Like sambo is like the Russian, I mean obviously the Russians, they're like elite, right, in
yeah,
both
yeah.
wrestling and sambo. So I think like probably if you're really thinking about like which is the more superior art, it's probably sambo, because sambo is like it's you see both wrestling and jiu-jitsu, and also you see striking in
I
sambo.
don't know too much about sambo. Could you
Dude,
explain that a little bit more in
so
greater?
so so you know Khabib, right? Like Khabib
Khabib, of course, yeah, like
Nurmagomedov.
Khabib.
Yeah,
No,
right. So Khabib, yes, he's a wrestler, but he's also a sambo artist. He's one of the best. Or he's I think he's a master of sambo. Like in Russia, they give out titles like master or grandmaster or like world master, something like that. So
yeah.
yeah, so he's a master in sambo,
Is
along with
sambo
wrestling.
essentially like a mix of like for example like Inchin karate at the place in the gym I work at with like I work out at, they kind of mix elements of judo, karate, jiu-jitsu. So is this kind of like a mix of like different martial arts kind of combined into one, or is it its own thing but similar to others?
So sambo, you'll see, you'll probably look at sambo and you'll see that they are doing grappling on their back like jiu-jitsu. They're also grappling like wrestling, right? They're also striking. Um,
Whoa.
yeah, and they wear a gi, I think, or something which at least looks similar to a gi, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, so it's in a sense it's like many other martial arts, but it's also kind of it's doing its own thing at the same time. It's honestly the best way to compare is like sambo. is what MMA is, like a proto MMA, if that makes sense.
Okay, okay. Like for striking, I'm kind of curious. What do you think is more effective in MMA? Like, and this is up for debate. Some people will say that boxing is superior. Some people will say kickboxing. Um, what's your take on that? Like, what do you think?
Muay Thai, bro.
Muay
Like it's
Thai?
I don't think there's like much of a competition, right? Like
Yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
mean, I know there is like the Burmese striking style, right? So if like Muay Thai is the art of 6 limbs, they're like the art of 10 limbs or something, because they use their head for striking as well. Which I mean, I don't know how effective, like I don't know how good that is as a fighter for you in the long run, right? If you're just using your head to strike, because that's like basically just asking for concussions. But Muay Thai is, I would say, like in the MMA scene, like that's the best striking art that I know of, right? I'm sure, because like hey, there's could be other stuff out there which I don't know about, because I don't come from a striking background, but from what I see is that Muay Thai is what I see as being as most effective, because it utilizes pretty much like some of your most it utilizes most of your body, right? And utilizes parts of your body which I think are better suited for striking, like your elbows and your knees, right? Like yes, boxing you're using your hands, but like look at your hands, dude. Your hands have so many bones, right? There's so many moving parts. Like I don't think your hands are really meant for striking. There could be parts of your hands which you can kind of use, but like there's more of a risk factor if you were to strike using your hands versus say your elbow or your knee.
Yeah, and I definitely think Muay Thai opens up like the different, body parts you could use like against. Like you could use your elbows, you could use, hands, feet, legs, thighs, whatever.
Your shin, dude.
Shins, yeah, shins.
Those shin
That's why you wear
guards.
shin guards, man, to protect your shins. Because if you're, continuously being, kicked, it hurts. It adds up. Especially like
Right.
one kick, one leg kick, then another leg kick. You're like, oh shit, this already hurts.
Right, exactly. You're slowly breaking your enemy down, right? Like, and this is the thing. Like, this is what you call it. This is what Sun Tzu talks about, right? And I thought about this, right? So Sun Tzu talks about how you should attack where your opponent is not defending, right? Where your opponent is weakest, right? So think about it, right? Like, if you're just like head hunting, right? Like, generally speaking, like you can defend your head, right? Like, you know what I mean? Like, if you're quick,
Yeah,
if you're
yeah.
trained, if you're real practice, right? You block with your arms, your heads,
But some
right?
people forget that fundamental, defense of keeping your
I
hands to
mean,
your head. They get
yeah,
so riled up that they want to like drop it
right,
down and get some punches in. But that just leaves your head like the most like like the most vulnerable part of your the thing that you got to defend, because if you get hit in the head, you're pretty much done. Like the head is pretty much where the brain is, and the brain tells you like how to communicate with the
right,
body. Yeah,
right,
not to get too
exactly,
scientific or
right.
anything
And
like
because
that.
the people will try to protect their heads more, right, and protect most of their upper body. But like, if you look at think about like the your calf kicks, right, your
Yeah.
shins, right, like that's just like that's a part of the body which is not like as well defended. You know what I mean? You can just kick at it nonstop and just slowly chip away, and your kick is your most powerful strike, right? It's like you're generating power from your most powerful muscles. This is the most powerful strike, right? So, like Sun Tzu, what Sun Tzu talks about is, use your strongest strike, use your strongest attack on the opponent's where the opponent's defense is weakest, right?
Yeah.
And if you're doing it persistently, of course, like that's going to take damage in the long run. Like like look with Sun Tzu, right? Like because his like the art of war and stuff is kind of so broad, like you can apply to many things, but and sometimes you don't want to apply to everything, but
Well,
I feel like
you could
go
apply it
ahead.
to a lot of things in life. Like the book I was reading currently, and it's funny that you mentioned Sun Tzu because I just finished a book called "The Art of War" for small businesses,
Right,
and even the author was a practitioner in jiu-jitsu. He even mentions that many of the concepts that Sun Tzu preaches in his in his literature applies very well to jiu-jitsu, because think about it, you're going against like one opponent. That guy is your competition essentially. And for when you apply that to small businesses, let's say you're new to a field and you're trying to establish a small business and you got these larger competitors, you kind of have to use those kind of teachings from the art of war in order to, because the whole point of the art of war is to see, okay, it's not about so much military strength, rather it's about the leader's values, like the general's values, based off what I've read, his own values and the morality that, let's talk a little bit about morality, because that's one of the first key values that Sun Tzu talks about, right?
Man.
Talks about
See,
morale.
see, what I'll say is this: I think the art of war is winning. I think that's what the art of war is about. It's about winning. But you're right; they do talk about morality, right? It's like the first point they bring up,
Yeah,
right? What I think, right? So here's the thing: Sun Tzu talks about a general must fight for a moral leader, right? Because he's a general, right? Because he wasn't a king; he was just a general, right? So he's saying a general must fight for a moral leader, right? And if a leader is moral, then the army has a higher chance of winning. But the thing is, like the majority of the book is about deception. It's about information warfare. It's about spying. It's about uh, just base treachery, right? Like that's what it's about. Lying is about figuring out how to deceive your opponent, right? Like that's not really, like if you might think about it, you're like, hey, is that really moral? So here's the thing, right? Moral systems are very contextual dependent, right? So like the morality system you have in say Saudi Arabia is going to be different from the morality system you have in Brazil, right?
yeah,
And the idea is when they say that the leader must be moral is I think what he's really trying to say is that the leader must establish a moral system where the leader, right, he or she or whoever is the most moral person, right? Like they are always in the right. They are the righteous person. And in a war, they are the righteous side, right? So, like how do you do that? You do that with, say, propaganda, right? Like each country thinks, generally speaking, when a country goes to war, or not just a country, but when people go to war, right? And it could be whether in business or whatever. Generally speaking, the winning side, right? The side which ultimately win and ultimately ends up winning, or the stronger side, usually thinks that they're in the right. Heck, I mean, both sides could think that they're morally correct, that they're in the morally better situation compared to their opponent, because
because
that's kind of what the good leader is feeding that to their public, right? It's saying like, hey, we are the morally correct ones here, right? Like, there's a reason why George Bush was like, oh, Iran, they're part of the Axis empire, they're the axis of evil empire. Okay, now we're gonna go invade, right? Like, you know what I mean? Like,
there's
it's
an
those little, yeah, good,
sorry to cut you off, but there's a very interesting quote that I once read. I forgot who it's from, so I can't properly cite it. But it says, "One man's freedom fighter is another man's terrorist, and vice versa."
yeah.
So
Yeah,
like
like
let's
like think about it. Like who was like during the American Revolution, right? If you were, the British Empire,
yeah,
right? If you're an English person, like to you, these rebels, right? The George Washington,
yeah.
Jefferson, like to us, they're heroes, obviously, right? Because hey, you're Americans. But for them, yeah,
They were
that
seen as
that's not a hero,
terrorists,
right?
essentially. Yeah, they're
The
saying
Boston
like
Tea Party. They would have seen the Boston Tea Party like, what is this? You know, why are you sabotaging your own country?
yeah, and in a way, like also I've seen this very prevalent recently in the Middle East. Israel, Palestine, especially in the Gaza Strip, and you see there on the Israeli side, there's this sense of unity, in a sense, and also on the Palestinian side. In fact, I read an article saying that this is the first time in many years that Hamas and the Palestinian Authority were able to unite, like with their beliefs when it came to Jerusalem, which is very contested right now and under a lot of international scrutiny. And the thing is, you need to create that sense of unity. That way, people can see, your sense of morality in a way. Because if let's say for the Palestinian side, I'm of Palestinian descent, I do find myself that I can see where the Israelis are coming from maybe some of their point of views. But for me, I see myself, my blood is Palestinian, so those I have to side with my people. And what Palestinians have said essentially is that, listen, we Palestinians cannot keep like stay divided. You can't have, okay, Gaza is one part of Palestine and West Bank, and then that divides us in a way, because it says, oh, that's a Palestinian from Gaza. I'm from the West Bank. Why do I relate to him? Rather than, oh, we're all Palestinians, we're all in this together. So I think that's a sense of unity is definitely important as well, and that comes from morality too, like seeing, okay, do we have the same sense perspective on morality, or is our definition of morality and our interpretation completely different than like our even some people from our blood or our ethnicity? So what's your take on that?
Yeah, I think morality can be used as a unifying force, right? Like, I mean, I mean, morality, culture, right? Because
It's
morality is
one
also
aspect. It's one aspect. I'm not saying it's the morality creates unity in the end of the day. I'm just saying that's
I
one.
think it's an essential aspect in creating unity, right? Like if you're people, if you're a group, right? If you're a team and you cannot agree on the same like ethical principles or same moral principles, right? And you're gonna be entering a conflict where definitely there's gonna be breaches of those moral principles. Like how would you know when those moral principles are being breached or when they're not? Like if say person A thinks that person B doing what he did was immoral, but then person C thinks that's no, they were completely okay, they were completely fine. That creates disunity, right? So morality for that reason is essential in creating unity, right? And like the good leader, a good leader will ensure that there is that sense of morality, right? Like a good leader will be able to adapt the moral system to be able to fit whatever situation they're in, so that they're still in a morally righteous position, at least from their perspective, right? From
What would
so
you
it's not
say?
it's go ahead.
Go ahead. Go ahead. Sorry.
So it's not about like who's right or wrong, right? Because like it's up to anyone, it's up to the people to judge ultimately, right? It's not about who's right or wrong. It's about can the leader convince his group that they're in the right position, morally right position.
Yeah, and the thing is, it's based off their own interpretation of morality and how they can convey it to the rest of the
I mean, it's
people.
just a tool at that point, right?
Yeah,
Like
yeah,
it's not even about
exactly.
what my interpretation of morality is. It's like, okay, how can I use this tool effectively so that people follow me, right? So that people are willing to go to war for me, right? And I think it's important to also like define kind of what like war is, right? So power, right? And so power is basically the ability to restrict or expand someone's options, right? Violence is the use of force to restrict someone's option. War is when two violent forces, right? So two forces who are trying to restrict each other's options, when they conflict against, when they collide, when they conflict against each other, like that's war. So if say I'm a business and I'm trying to take market share in Houston, and another business comes along and they're also trying to take market share in Houston, right? And we're willing to undercut each other, so we're using the force of economics basically, or the force of price to try to restrict each other from the market. Then at that point we're at war, right? We're not physically fighting, but it's just that we are two forces. We're using force to restrict each other's options, right? So we're using violence against each other basically, and these violent forces are conflicting, and therefore that's war, right?
Yeah, but when it comes to war, the thing is, what people get wrong is that two forces are going to be equally as powerful. There's always going
Yeah,
to be one that has the upper hand, has maybe more allies. That's why I think it's crucial if you are going to determine war, like declare war, that you know who your allies are and know like what your strengths are,
yeah,
and
right.
also don't be open to deception. Like remember like how you were talking about, oh, deception is one of the key factors when it comes to like the other side trying to make themselves look weaker, and when that, that's not the case, and it is a powerful tool to show, oh, we're underutilized, our army's not as strong, and then in actuality they're like just is like not too far away from the force of power from the other side, so yeah.
I mean deception could also be showing that your strength, right? Like, so one time, right, the United States released a film of, and it was just a loop of five planes going across the sky, five fighter jets, right? And it was a loop. They released it, and they purposely made sure that the film got to the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union ended up overspending on trying to catch up its air force to be larger than the United States. So the Soviet Union, basically what they did was they took, so what happens is when you take resources from one, when you take resources, a lot of resources, and put it into just one project, you're taking resources away from all the other projects, right? So the way the United States was able to weaken this, like a method of weakening the Soviet Union, right,
Yeah.
was to over project their power, right? So they deceive not by showing that they're weak; they deceive by showing that they're so strong, and the Soviet Union was like, okay, we have to catch up to them, and in the process suddenly all these other departments are suffering because, oh well, now all the money is just gone to making these planes to compete against the planes of a country, but these planes, the planes of that country don't actually exist.
Yeah, but also, yeah, like I think that's also very like when it comes to war or conflict, essentially like some person like showing how much power they have. Like for example, let me give you an example. During the jiu-jitsu tournament, I saw this really buff dude, like really muscular, had like a lot of mass on him. We're the same weight, but he had a little bit more muscle mass on him. And my coach just said, listen, Zayd, don't let that scare you because that just goes to show that he tried to look more like a bodybuilder than actually a jiu-jitsu player. Because if you see actual really good black belts and blue belts, they're not the most built or jacked people. That's more of a bodybuilder kind of thing. So when I saw that guy, even though it kind of intimidated me a bit because he had so much muscle mass on him, but at the same time, if the person who can, the person who's trying to deceive and to show how strong they are in actuality may be the weaker side, so yeah, so
Yeah.
what was your
Also,
take?
your coach could have deceived you into knowing whether he was actually strong or weak, right? Like your coach could have said that, right? Like your coach could have known, for example, that, oh, this guy's actually very good. Let me go to Zay. Let me tell him that, oh, he's just show, right? Yes, deceiving you, but guess what? Now that's gonna give you confidence that you're gonna win, right? If you were to go compete against that guy, you're competing with you're rather than competing in fear, you're competing in confidence. Now you're gonna have a higher probability of winning. So you kind of see like what I mean, like like the deception is not just about can you deceive your opponent. Like in a sense, deception is a tool which you can use universally. Like you can use deception on your own men if it means that, hey, it's gonna give you the results which you want. It's gonna allow you to win, right? And like ultimately, like that's what the whole point of war is. Like you don't, like if you're entering war not to win, then you're gonna lose. Like you don't understand what the point of war is. Like the point of war is to win.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there, no one's goal in life or any obstacle. Like you don't go into a match, for example, thinking I'm gonna lose. It's more
Right.
like I'm gonna give my 100%, and I want to win. And losing is not even on your mind because if even if that thought of losing just pops up, like it could trick you, and the whole winning mindset could be affected by that in a way.
Right.
So when I go into a jiu-jitsu tournament or something, I don't even look at I say to myself, I'm going to give my 110%, and it'd be nice to win. I don't think about losing.
Really? You say it's nice, dude? I used to always go every single time. I was like, I'm gonna win. I'm gonna like. I could be going against the state champion, and I was like, yeah, I'm gonna win. This guy, he's nothing. I'm gonna win. And in my mind, I'll be just drilling through them, and then obviously I'll compete. Sometimes I won, sometimes I lost. But for
Yeah.
me, like at least like this is the type of person I'm, right? Like I cannot have that little voice at all in my head. If it's there, I need to kill it immediately. So I'm just like, I'm gonna win no matter what.
Well, some people, again, you could argue this. You could say that some people who keep in mind that listen, like they humble themselves a little bit, and they're like they see themselves as humbling
Yeah,
themselves a
yeah, yeah,
bit,
yeah.
and they're like not too stressed out about like winning itself, but saying, okay, what technique do I got to use to take an advantage? And again, that's all part of the winning
I
mindset. Okay,
mean, but you can think about what technique you're gonna use, right? Like if you have the mentality of I'm gonna win, right? So rather than it would be nice to win. If you have the mentality I'm gonna win, that doesn't mean that you're gonna ignore the fact that your opponent's skills, right?
yeah, but
You're still gonna drill them. You're still gonna think about them.
saying I'm gonna win instead of how I'm gonna win, I think that's the question.
Nah, but if you say that I'm gonna win, right? If you're a good martial artist, you're also thinking about how I'm gonna win,
I
right?
said,
Like
yeah,
I think knowing how you're gonna win gives you the confidence to be able to say I'm gonna win.
yeah, I definitely see that. Like, what's another thing from Tanzu's that he mentions? Like, what's
Sun
another?
Tzu, dude, he mentioned so many things. Like you have to understand, the art of war is just a pamphlet on how to win. Like literally, it's a winning guide, right? And there's so many just interesting things which you can apply to so many different places. For example, like the idea of being compact, right? Of you want all your resources, like you want all your men and your resources, everything to be close together, right? You don't want to, because it's easier to defend that than say something which is stretched out, right? Or the idea of, obviously, that all warfare is information and all warfare is deception, right? Like yes, of course it is. Like it makes sense. Right, like if you think about things like resource management, time, considering factors which are beyond your control, right? Like
Economics, you need to keep in mind the
yeah,
economic factor. It's
economics.
not just so much the physical and military aspect of it. You also need to keep in mind, how am I going to take care of my soldiers? How am I going to unite them psychologically? How am I
Exactly.
going to, provide, like, because the thing is, like, if you need to keep the soldiers on your side, you got to make sure that you're taking care of them, that you are, like, because they're looking at you as the leader. And if you're showing that, like, the leader is only very arrogant and selfish, and he only wants to win based off what his needs are, without taking care of his army, the army is slowly, the army is going to, his military is going to start to break
I
up.
mean, internally the army, like yes, there's that, but also I feel like at least in like a purely militaristic setting, I think discipline, like just drilling your soldiers in discipline, right? Like that's gonna kind of prevent a lot of that, because there's gonna be moments where you're just gonna have to be like a bit more selfish, right? You're gonna have to be like, hey, I have to take this gamble, or I have to take this hit here for us to be able to achieve the conditions of victory, right?
Yeah, but there's always that one soldier that's not always going to agree, and may, like, see what the leader is doing,
Yeah,
and,
but
like,
that's where discipline comes in, right? If you have a soldier who doesn't agree, right? Like
yeah.
you either try to figure out how to correct them, or you make an example out of them, right? Because
And
like
how? Give me an
good.
example. Give me an
Oh,
example.
do you know how, I think his name was Cassis. So have you heard the word decimation?
T- I don't know the definition of decimation, but
Gotcha. Decimation means like to destroy, basically, right?
okay,
To
essentially
decimate, right?
decimate. Okay,
So decimation comes from a Roman punishment, right? Basically, uh, I don't know who exactly invented it, but I know that Cassus used it famously, and I think his name is Cassus. He was part of the triumvirate with Julius Caesar and Pompey.
okay,
But basically, you go, if say your army loses a battle, right, and or especially if your army like ran away, you basically round the guys up, and you every 10th man. So it doesn't matter whether that guy was brave and a good fighter, doesn't or and try to stick his ground, or whether that guy ran away. It doesn't matter. Every 10th man you pick out. So you count, right? So you line them up: one, two, three, four,
yeah,
five,
yeah,
seven, eight, nine, 10. You're coming with me, and the nine guys before you. You guys have to take sticks and beat this guy to death. Go. And you do that throughout your entire army. Every 10th man is going to get beaten up by the ninth guys to death. That's where the word decimation comes from. So that would basically, if you were weak, if you're pathetic, if you did not listen to that general, right, you were not the only ones who were going to suffer. Everyone was going to suffer. And the reason they were able to get away with that is because the Roman army was just so disciplined, right? They were like the individual was crushed in the Roman system, at least the Roman military system. It was all about the collective. So
yeah.
something like that was extremely effective, right?
Yeah, but also, yeah, and I see that also demonstrated in the U.S. military. Like, again, have you ever seen the movie Full Metal Jacket?
No,
I'm assuming you've heard of Full Metal Jacket.
no, I've heard of Full Metal Alchemist. That's
Okay,
about it.
I can explain. Full Metal Jacket was a movie in 1987. It was focused on the Vietnam War. And there's this one scene, and with the generals just going through, like, talking with his troops, yelling. Everyone's in, like, their position, like this, standing like this. Yes, sergeant, and, like, and he sees one guy, and the guy, one of his soldiers, and he has a smile on his face. You could obviously tell he's a goofy kind of guy.
Right.
And then he's like, "What's up with that stupid smile on your face?" He's like, "Give me 10." And then, like, he said, and then he keeps adding on the push-ups. And
Right.
I don't know exactly what, like, it's been a while since I've seen the movie, but he kind of makes, throughout the first half of the movie, kind of makes an example out of that guy. There's even a scene in which the fat soldier has a donut hidden in, like, near his bed bunk, and, like,
Right.
the soldier finds it, and he's like, "Everyone's gonna start, like, scrubbing the floor with uh I don't know what it was, like, toothbrushes, because this guy decided to, sneak this donut in." And I was just
Right.
like, okay, so that's what came to mind. Again, I
Right.
could have gone the scene. It's been a while since I've seen the movie, so I don't know
Yeah.
exactly what the punishment
What do you
was.
what do you think of military movies or war movies?
Military movies? Well, it depends, because there's so many.
Yeah, yeah, but like, so I was having a discussion earlier with someone, right? And they said they don't like war movies. They don't like military movies, right? And I'm like, why? It's like because like the best ones are about how pointless war is. right? So they don't like it because they understand why they're making it, but at the same time they don't want to continuously see that theme over and over again. So, but like, what do you think? Like, what's your opinion on military movies?
I think if they're done well, and they're historically, again, it's not going to always be 100% historically correct. There's always going to have that Hollywood
I
dramatic
mean,
element
a
to it.
military movie could just be like
Yeah.
medieval shit, like random fantasy, just people are fighting, right? Like,
Yeah, oh yeah, it
yeah,
doesn't always have
yeah,
to necessarily be like
right.
based on a
It's
true
just a movie
story.
about war and the people who are involved in it, like in like a physical war. Like,
I think that it needs to be complex because a war is complex in itself. It needs to
right,
explore different themes. It needs to develop its characters. It needs to make you feel, and that's for every movie. To be honest with you, I'm kind of
right. But
one
what particular themes like there are some certain particular themes which like define certain genres, right?
saving. I'll give you an example. Saving
Go ahead.
Private Ryan. Have you ever seen the movie Saving Private Ryan?
I've heard of it, but I haven't watched
Yeah,
it.
there's a scene that is very, like, they have one of the soldiers captured, and the soldiers begging them, please don't kill me, please don't kill me, and these are the heroes that are literally pointing the gun at the soldier. And it leads, like, it gives the audience kind of like a reflection, like, okay, well, these are supposed to be the good guys, but here's a soldier begging for his life, like, please don't kill me, please don't kill me, but we're supposed to be rooting for the guys that have the gun to his face. So that kind of explores in a complex theme in itself, like, are these really the good guys after all? Are they really the moral ones? That's an example of, if it was to bring up more difficult questions rather than, oh, the army is the good guys and the Taliban, or whatever they're
Right, right,
going
of course.
against is the bad guys, then there's no complexity to it. I feel like, you also have to establish your characters, make you feel for the army, or the military as well. Even if it's like a Lord of the Rings movie, like when they had the fight scenes and stuff, you generally care for the main characters, because throughout the movie they develop it. And the Lord of the Rings movies are pretty freaking long; they're like 3 hours or so.
The
Yeah,
epic suit, yeah.
yeah, and Peter Jackson's an amazing director, and he was able to, you care for Frodo and all these characters, and then when they're in peril, and by all these creatures and different forces they have to fight, you know their personality, and you know what they stand for and who they are. That's why I like Saving Private Ryan. It does, and it brings such a human aspect out of the military, because so often we see on the news that the military, they're either in war or defending our nation, but you don't really get to see a more complex view of, like, their families, what they stand for as individuals, their personality, um, et cetera, et cetera. So I feel
Right.
like a good military movie will focus on character development. It'll focus on more complex themes. Not just black and white, good guy, bad guy, but it will get the audience to question themselves in a way, to get them to think, because I think that's just in any movie that really raises difficult questions is a movie that is above the rest in a way.
So does for a movie to be good, and this is regardless of what genre it is, do you think it has to raise those difficult questions? Like could a movie be good, like to be like exceptionally good without ever like asking difficult questions to its audience?
Well, I think we need to ask ourselves difficult questions, because if everything is just kind of straightforward and handed down to us and fed to us,
I mean,
you know,
yeah, but I'm talking about like, can a movie be good if it's not like,
it can,
would
it
you
can. It,
so for an exceptional movie, for a movie to be exceptional, like you would think like, okay, this is one of the greatest movies of all time. Does it need to ask this difficult questions, or can it just be like, just a life, or just you know a movie about a bus driver, driving through the countryside of Japan, for example?
well, in itself, it does bring up some sort of complexity in a way. I don't like films that are very straightforward and handed down, like, in a way, like,
Yeah,
or cliche. Like, for me, you ask me, oh, what makes a good military movie? Those are my two main values, like,
right.
character development, and also, of course, production value, direction, production, all that together is it like contribute to the quality of the movie. But for me, I want to care about the military. I want to care about the leader, and I also,
Mm,
at the same time, want to be challenged as an audience member. I don't want
right.
to just believe that these are the good guys, and end of story, and Taliban are bad guys. And I feel like movies are improving in that way, that they're giving a more perspective of the other side as well. Like nowadays, you'll see, like, if there's a movie about a war in the Middle East, you'll see the perspective of the civilians, and that maybe the Americans aren't doing the best for that country, and
Mhm.
maybe there's more. Maybe the good guys that we're cheering on for throughout the movie, maybe what they're doing is not even in the best interest of morality. So,
I mean, well, then again, right?
but then
Contextual.
what
Right,
like, but
right.
then the universal, there's a universal morality in a way. Like we know that killing people is bad. like
Sure, but
it,
like, would you, if you were to go back? This is why I say contextual, right? If you were to say go back to the Aztec Empire or the Mayan Empire, like they were performing human sacrifice, or not the Mayan Empire, the Mayan civilization, right? And the Aztec Empire, like they were performing human sacrifices. To them, like that was essential. It wasn't like, oh, it's just no. It's not just that it's good. It's essential. You need to do it. So that's what I mean. Like, if there is such thing as a universal morality, it needs to apply across all contexts, no matter what, like whatever the principles of it are. I mean, maybe there is. It's just like I don't know, what those universal principles will be.
well, you did you one time me and you were talking, and then you're like, I'm like, oh, well, morality could have so many interpretations. Like, how do you know what is the universal morality? But I think that kind of has to do with also religion and culture as well. I think that also contributes to what people
Right, context,
perceive as
right? Yeah,
their kind of morality. Like a Muslim's morality is a little bit different than, let's say, Jews or Christians, for example. Even though we're all people of the book, there are different, you know, different
different
teachings,
systems,
different
right?
systems, different teachings. Yeah,
Right. Yeah, yeah. Fair, fair.
some
Yeah, dude.
people. Yeah,
But
exactly.
but also like just real quick, right?
Hmm.
Have you seen the movie which called Mr. It's called Mr. Hello, I think, or Mr. Happy?
Mr. Happy. Who does this? Who's in it?
It's dude, it's a Japanese film, and
I
it's
probably
like
won't have
it's
seen
old.
it.
Ah, gotcha. It's literally a movie about a bus driver who drives from one end of the country, like who's driving from the countryside to the city, right? Like and like the passenger they pick up along the way, and so on and so forth.
Let me search it up.
Very like
What's it called? Mr. Happy?
it's either Mr. Happy or Mr. Hello, something like that.
Mr. It's not Mr. Happy. Mr. Hello. I'm curious myself, like what the film is about.
Yeah, I think you can find it for free on YouTube. It's very interesting.
I'll
Like
search it up later. It's okay. We're in.
it's very like it's very relaxing, right? You're
Explain
just
explain
chilling.
the plot of the movie because this
It's
does
just
seem.
literally a bus drive. It's a guy who's driving a bus filled with passengers, and like you see the stories of those passengers, kind of how they interact with each other on the bus, and sometimes they kind of share parts of their stories. For example, there's this one of the main passengers who gets on the bus, at the very beginning of the movie, right? It's this lady, this very young girl who comes from like a poor family, and she's going to the city. And one of the before they get on the bus, this old lady asks her, "Oh, are you going to be cleaning or doing the dishes and stuff like that in the city, right? Like a cleaning job." And like her mother kind of just starts crying. Like the girl's mother just starts crying, and she's like, "Oh, like I'm sorry. Like you're such a young girl. Like it's sad that this is happening to you, right?" Which is basically like basically what's happening is that poor family is taking their little daughter on this bus to Tokyo or to whichever city they're going to, and they're basically going to sell her into prostitution.
Yeah, that. But doesn't that bring up difficult questions in
That
itself?
is, yeah, in a
It
sense,
does.
they're difficult, but the way the film tackles those difficult questions, I think, like I like I don't think like they dive super deep into it.
I
It's
don't
more
think it
like
needs to be dived
yeah,
into super
right.
deep.
It's more like kind of just like yes, it's there, and it's like the struggles of the bus driver who kind of knows about what's going on, and like how he's kind of contemplating like what can I do to like maybe stop this, or like if I should take any action, or is inaction is better. You know what I mean? So there's still like difficult. I guess there's still questions being asked, but I don't think they're like I don't think those questions need to be
It's
so
more subtle. You're
strong.
saying it's more subtle. It's not. They
It,
don't delve deep into the
I
complexity.
think it's
It's
more
more.
realistic. I think if you're in the situations that these characters are in, the questions, for example, like the question of should I take an action or should I not take action, like is this my business to be involved in, you know
Yeah, yeah. I
I,
got you.
I feel like that's more of a realistic question than like a more deeper question, like you were talking about, like right, like which side is are the heroes really the heroes, right? Like I think that's more of a more complex situation. So what I'm saying is like a movie can be great even if it asks questions, but like in a more realistic way, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I'm not saying it has to be over the top or anything like that, but
Right.
there's also another film I wanted to mention. Again, this is now like branching on to films, but it's a one that I do want to. It's a Japanese film as well. It's very well known. It's also known as one of the most disturbing, actually, movies of all time. It's called Audition. Now,
Audition. What's it
Audition, yeah,
about?
I think it does bring a complexity in a way. So it's basically about in the beginning of the film, you see this child's mother, she passes away, and the father comes to his school, and essentially he has to bring the bad news that the mother has passed away. The film then fast forwards like 20 years or so. The dad is grown up, the son is grown up, the son has a girlfriend, and the
Right.
dad is feeling alone because he's for so long he hasn't had a woman in his life. So his friend, who's a film producer, he's like, "Oh, let's start this gig in which we bring these girls and pretend like they're auditioning for a movie role, and we'll find the right girl through there for you."
Dude,
I know it sounds like a
dang.
terrible idea, but
I mean, don't get me wrong. Like I know Japanese movies, they explore some interesting
yeah,
ideas, man.
no, this is an interesting theme because you start to question yourself. Okay, this is kind of a deceiving way of trying to get a girl
Oh no,
to.
it says like it's disgusting. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
But
but
but it's like hey, there's no movie like you know what like you don't see movies on that, right? You don't see literature on that as or at least as often. So when you're exposed to, especially if it's well made, like it's like huh. So that's like it like sometimes you know what I mean. Like sometimes you have to explore the perspective. You have to explore what a monster is. I think, or you have to explore like things which you may perceive as negative, right?
yeah, but here we have the main character doing a very deceiving thing,
Right, right.
and but at the same time you feel bad for him because his wife passed away 20 years, but that doesn't make what he's doing is
Yeah,
right.
it doesn't justify his actions, but you still want you want to know like why,
Yeah,
you know?
exactly.
You want to
So
know what's motivating him really
yeah,
and
and the
what's going
movie
on.
has
Like
a
it's
lot of.
captivating.
Yeah, it is. There's a lot of twists and turns in the movie. I don't want to spoil it, especially for people who haven't seen it, because it does turn out the girl he does find, there's something up with her. There's definitely something up with her, and it goes to show that maybe an immoral action that at first may seem like, oh, I got like a benefit out of it, may not, so in the long term may not be so. And the reason why I bring up that film is because we're talking about films that raise difficult questions and main characters that maybe may not always be in the right and may not do the right things, but even though they have good intentions. So I do like the film that it did bring that, like the main character is doing a deceiving thing and like something that is looked down in our society. Rather than going to talk to a girl, you're pretending like she's going to get a movie role. You know, so and it's one of my favorite films. I think it's very well done, and if anyone hasn't seen it, I highly recommend it. I do feel like international films in a way kind of stray away from the whole black and white perspective. Not to say American films follow that perspective, but when you delve into maybe there are more colors than just black and white when it comes to characters and their intentions and whatnot, like rather
What's your
than good.
favorite film?
That's hard, man. That's a really
The
hard. I could give you maybe a top five list. I could probably give you a top
what's your top five?
or top three.
What's your top three?
I would say A Clockwork Orange by Stanley Kubrick. That's my
Mm,
first number one favorite movie. I don't know if you've seen these movies or not. I would say you would have to. There's a film called. I mean, I have to have the Godfather on there. Like that's one of my favorite. Francis Ford Coppola and Apocalypse Now, another Ford
mm.
Coppola movie. And Apocalypse Now, that's a good military movie. If you haven't
Yeah.
seen that, it's
No, I
very
haven't seen
long
it.
though.
I'll definitely check it out. Yeah.
There's an extended cut, which pretty much
Ex-
has the
yeah.
extended cut, the director's cut, because the story behind that film is very interesting. That they were stuck in the Philippines, or it could have been another country. I believe it was the Philippines for a few months, and they were trying to run money out of the production costs. And the director Francis Ford Coppola had to mortgage his house to pay for the rest of the film, and some of the production crew and stuff. They were stuck in the Philippines, like in the middle of freaking nowhere, and Al Pacino was considered for the role, the main character role. But he said, "I'm not going to be stuck in the Philippines for 3 months. I'd much rather take another movie in America." because he knew like the hardships that would come from filming in the Philippines, where it's super hot, long working hours, not the best condition to be in. It's not like they were staying at the Marriott or anything like that.
Mm.
And they finished the film, and like Francis Ford Coppola really dedicated those few years. The film was supposed to be released in 1976, but it took until 1979 for the film to actually be released, because it
Damn.
took so much time, like so much of the production costs and everything were starting to be held back. So Francis Ford Coppola kind of had to, with mortgaging his house and whatnot, had to kind of bring
Yeah.
it back to, you
Was
know
he able to pay his house back?
I mean, he
I
had,
hope he did lose his
yeah,
house.
he did. Of course, man. He had plenty of other hit films after that, like
Gotcha.
Outsiders, Rumblefish,
Oh, you dirty Outsiders? Dude, I love Outsiders. Good
Outsiders. The
film.
book is really good too.
Yeah, it is. It is.
It's very sad.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll say for me, I'll give you my favorite. My favorite film. It's a tie. It's between two films. One is called Jal Sagar. It's a Bengali movie which I saw not too long ago. It basically means the music room. It's classic, absolute amazing film. The other one, it's a more modern film. It's on Netflix. I think you can find it. Called The Beasts of No Nation.
Oh,
Beast, yeah,
with
both,
Idris Elba.
yeah, dude. Beasts of No Nation is epic, very epic. It's
I
like
haven't seen it.
it's
I've
about
heard
it's
great
about
things.
child soldiers. It's about child soldiers, and it's very good.
And the general's played by Idris Elba, isn't he?
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think so. I'll be
Eldri-
honest with you, bro. I don't know the actors' names.
it's all good, man.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but it's a fantastic film. I love it. And so the music room is like about the music room is just honestly, it's an experience. Like it's an auditory and primary and auditory, but also visual. Like it's an experience overall. It's a package. It's really it's poetry as film. Honestly, it's amazing. Love it.
I think also how the film is made, and like the different camera, the cinematography, the music, just the direction itself, everything, and the acting especially. I think acting is one of the most crucial roles, because you're watching actors essentially playing characters. And
Right.
if you don't 100% buy the fact that they're playing the characters they're playing, I see this a lot in American films. That I'm not quite buying, like some of the actors.
Really, dude. I think American films are good acting, bro. Like generally, like like the like the classic films and like the greats. You know,
The classic films and greats, yeah, but nowadays,
I mean, like even
some of the
now,
Netflix
dude.
stuff I've been watching, I've seen. Again, I'm not an actor, but I don't completely like it's more mediocre acting compared. It's not really bringing out the emotions or bringing out the characters as much from what I've
Mm.
seen. And this
It's
applies
it's
to
not a
TV shows.
Tetsuo. It's not a Tetsuo.
It's not. It's not.
We watched the
That's
movie Tetsuo Iron Man. It's basically what it means.
oh,
Last night, dude. If you're gonna watch that film, I mean, honestly, it's
d-
pretty
d-
gory. It's
okay.
a
Let me explain to people who don't know. Tautsu, the Iron Man, is kind of a sci-fi horror movie from 1989.
sci-fi. Is it sci-fi?
Come on, man. The guy's turning into
It's like
metals.
Japanese cyberpunk. I think no. Is it Japanese cyber? No. It's like
Wait, hold up. I'm gonna
look
search
look
this
what
up. I don't even
I
know
know
what.
it's a very distinguished genre. Like it's like a
Just give me a sec.
it's like industrial surrealism, man. That's what, but I know that it belongs to a specific genre.
Yeah. It's Japanese. I was right about 1989, and apparently it's a part of a film series too. There's more than one of them.
Japanese what? Japanese
Cyberpunk. I bet let me see.
cyberpunk.
Because that's a genre of super gory Japanese films. Yeah, it's a Japanese cyberpunk body horror film. Yeah,
Yeah, what a
dude.
film, dude.
Some of
It's
these
wild.
Japanese movies are freaking gory,
They're
man.
amazing, dude. Yeah, House is epic. House is just surreal. It's just so epic. And so is this movie. Both movies are both very surreal.
Do you think it would have been as good if it was made in the United States, though?
If it was made exactly like the way, like the techniques were exactly the same.
But I don't think in America we would have done like I think it would have been too controversial
It,
in a way.
what I mean, I don't know what the context around the movie was when it was released. I assume it was probably very controversial in Japan as well. I mean,
Yeah,
it should have been at least.
because we have ratings here. We have G, PG,
I mean, yeah,
PG
but
13,
yeah.
R. This was entering like almost NC-17 territory, bro.
I don't
So I
know.
don't think it would have made. And also, like in America, we're more focused on how much money is the film gonna make, because it's a business essentially. This seemed more like an art film in a way, like
Oh yeah, it
not
was
so
a
much meant for the
student project,
profit.
right? I think it was a student project.
It was a student project.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah.
it was a very well done
Dude,
student project. The
imagine,
special effects were really
right?
up to
Imagine
par.
being a student. Imagine being a student, and you make a film like that as a student. It's like what?
Yeah,
Like that's one way to announce yourself to the world, I
well,
guess.
some of these student filmmakers are talented, man.
Oh yeah, of
The
course.
original Evil Dead,
Yeah.
1981, directed by Sam Raimi. He directed
Mm.
the Spider-Man movies after that film.
Word.
Yeah, that was a student film. And if you see The Evil Dead, it's not a PG-13 or PG movie at all. Like it's very gory. I think the original initial release was rated NC-17.
Interesting,
Yeah, man. What do you think of the new Netflix films and stuff, and the TV shows, and all
dude.
these new streaming?
I mean, they're alright. It depends. Like, honestly, I like what I really like right now. What's going on when it comes to the like all the streaming platforms is the content they're producing in the non-English content they're producing. Honestly, like there's some like original. So like for example, India, right? Like India is a fuck. It's like it's a gold mine for when it comes. If you're a lover of films or like content, you would love India, right? Because like there's so many languages and each language has their own film industry, right? In India, I think there's over like the census is like over 1,000 languages,
Oh,
right, and dialects. So yeah, there's a lot of different film industries, right, all at the same time influencing each other and stuff like that, right? So because of that, like the stuff which is like there's always been very talented filmmakers who just couldn't break into the mainstream, right? Because generally speaking, the mainstream of India is Hindi movies, right? Or sometimes like your English movies or your Tamil movies here and
Bollywood.
there.
Are they all
Yeah.
considered Bollywood, or is
So
it
so
Bollywood specifically Hindi movies?
so Bollywood just Hindi movies.
Okay.
Yeah, Hindi film industry. Everything else is like their own film industry, right? So the thing was, there was a lot of talented people whose stories either were being blocked by the censor board, right? So censor board basically censors things who they don't things which they don't think the public should see. So like they would be like, hey, there's nudity in your film. That film cannot be released. There's nudity. There's too much gore, etc. Right? But because and the censor board is only concerned about public releases in theaters, right? They don't care if you release it on a TV channel or whatever, right? The great thing about these streaming platforms is now those movies and those projects which needed to go through the censor board because their method of distribution was through theaters, now they're just like, hey, we're just going to put it on a streaming service, right? Like we don't have to go through that board. And because of that, like the content from India is just exploding and it's amazing. And it's you're seeing guys from every these industries, these film industries which come from languages which don't really have much of a market, now suddenly they have access to a bigger market of not just India but really internationally. And India is just one example. Like I saw like a Turkish movie, or not movie but Turkish series, not recent, like a few
Turkish, yeah, they have a lot of good series. Like a
yeah,
lot of the Middle Eastern countries, and especially Arabic countries, they love Turkish soap operas. Like my
really,
grandparents,
yeah.
they'll yeah. There's a new one that my parents have actually been watching. It's called
Ataturk.
Ertugrul. No, it wasn't Ataturk. I think it's Ertugrul or something like that.
Mm,
Yeah, that's what it is. And essentially like the Turkish version of Game of Thrones set during the Ottoman Empire. And it's on Netflix. Now a lot of Muslims are like loving it, and Arabs are loving it because it brings us in a light that the Western media hasn't seen us in. Like as the warriors, as the good guys fighting against, the Crusaders, which were, we see as an oppressive force in a way, how they came
right,
into
right.
Jerusalem and slaughtered Muslims and Christians. Um, so I feel like in that way Netflix gave us an opportunity to like show that Muslims can be warriors as well too, and that maybe we have our own Game of Thrones in a way. So I do like Netflix productions when especially the international ones, but I also think a lot of them are cliche and a little, not so much a cliche, but maybe like half-assed in a
More
way.
marketable. I'm
More
joking.
marketable, yeah, exactly. Like I don't feel like the quality of some of their production is as good as maybe some of the more international ones.
I mean, but that the thing is like the international things you're talking about are like the best, the cream of the crop of the international stuff, right? Like every film we've mentioned, international film, is considered a great, like some of the greatest works from those countries, right? I think like generally speaking, like most films, just like most works in general across the board in any field, like are probably going to be mediocre, right? Like for something to be the best, it needs to be it needs to surpass something else, and once that thing has been surpassed enough times, it becomes mediocre. Like I'm sure, like when the films were first came out, the fact that they were just moving pictures already made them like amazing. You know what I mean?
What determines if a film is mediocre? Is it by the film, like the critical reception received from
No,
the
I think it
film?
depends on like it
The
depends on you,
individual, yeah,
the
that's what I'm
individual, right?
saying. Because you can go on Rotten Tomatoes and you'll see like your favorite film has 44%, even though you in particular love that film.
Right,
And that's
exactly.
probably from a production standpoint, acting standpoint. The critics really delve into like the actual quality of the film, rather if they enjoyed it, if it was
I
entertaining
mean, it depends
or
on the
not.
person, right? Like
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I think everyone is a critic. I think, and I think that's a good thing, right?
So then,
Like
like,
art should be
if
individualistic.
everyone's a critic, then like where do we set the line in which what critics we listen to?
Your choice.
Yeah, because professional film critics generally agree with one another. Like the majority agree. There might be a minority that may assume like a rotten film on Rotten Tomatoes is a fresh film, and you do see a couple of those. But the majority of professional film critics, that's how it contributes to the Rotten Tomatoes score, is by what does the majority think? What's their reception based off of it? And it determines if it's a good film or bad film just based off of that. And films are meant to entertain. People forget, like, it's about entertainment value, but also you want to get quality out of your entertainment as well.
Right.
So
Yeah.
yeah, man, what else besides films, like, do you do like hobbies or anything like that?
Dude, that's a dry way of asking that question, dude.
Oh,
Bro,
okay, we'll cut that
come
out.
on. I'm more interested in that. Nah, it's all good. I'm just playing. Dude, I've been doing a few things these days. Like the thing is like recently, like I've just been more busy with just like working with school and internship, right, and working on my projects, right,
Hmm.
and businesses. So that's pretty much preoccupied most of my time. The only like hobbies which I have been able to make time for is like reading, right, and like aquascaping, because like, well, I have to keep my fishes alive, right, and
What do
make
you
sure
like to
that
read?
dude, just anything, honestly. But like right now I'm reading The Art of War, right? I'm reading the Epic of Gilgamesh. So I'm in a few reading groups, and that's kind of how I'm able to like keep track of what to read, or like I guess be able to like be held accountable for what to read, right?
Yeah,
It's Epic of Gilgamesh, and I'm reading this thing called the Chanakya Niti, which is a political, geopolitical slash like like statecraft book, which was which was written by a man named Chanakya. He's basically the brains behind the Mauryan Empire, and the reason why the Mauryan Empire and the Mauryan dynasty was able to, replace the Nanda dynasty before it established the Mauryan Empire, which became like the first, the first almost completely unifying force in South Asia. And like since the Mauryan Empire, I don't think like there's never been an empire which has been able to unify as much of South Asia as the Mauryans did. And the Chanakya Niti, Chanakya, the guy who wrote it, is like one of the biggest. He basically set the foundation for that empire and for that dynasty, and it's very interesting because being able to read the Chanakya Niti and the Art of War at the same time, like I feel like it's like enhancing the experience of both, just because
mm.
they're both written as
Did they build off of it?
instruction. They were written at different times, right?
Okay.
Right, and obviously they're very ancient texts, right? But the reason why it's great is because like uh, they're both written as instruction manuals to their respective rulers, right? So like Sun Tzu wrote the Art of War because he was kind of like trying to explain how to win war to like a leader, basically one of the rulers in China during the warring state period. And Chanakya wrote the Chanakya Niti because he was trying to leave a guide for future Mauryan kings after Chandragupta Maurya the first, to basically even when he passes, have his teachings and have his principles, so the empire keeps going. And it did. It was pretty successful, and you get Ashoka the Great, like right, like one of the most influential individuals in the history of humanity, really, like, and probably the biggest reason why Buddhism is as big as it is today. And it comes from a lot of that. Ashoka and like the Chandragupta Mauryas and all those guys who came in the middle and after, right? The Mauryan Empire, and even after a lot of the other Indian empires which came afterwards, and a lot of these Indian states were heavily influenced by the Chanakya Niti, right? And the
Yeah.
reason the Chanakya Niti, I think, why I think it has like really it really rises to the top of when it comes to in the genre of state books about statecraft and leadership, is because you know India, the subcontinent, is extremely diverse, right? There's a lot of different ethnicities, a lot of different nations, and being able to unite those nations under one banner is extremely impressive. And the fact that the modern state of India even exists is a miracle in itself, because it has 1 billion people, and all of those people are like different ethnicities,
It's like a
different
continent.
cultures.
It's like
Yeah,
essentially a continent. It's not a country.
basically, it's like taking all of Europe and saying, okay, you're now one country, right? Like,
Yeah.
I mean, the fact that UK left the European Union recently, you know what I mean? Like, it shows just how hard that is, right? Or imagine if you said like, okay, all of Africa now you're one country. Like, hey, that's there's a reason why the conflicts we see in African nations occurs, because uniting people of different nations, of different ethnicities, different beliefs, different backgrounds together under one system is extremely difficult.
Well, I think also, division itself can also be very difficult as well because the Middle East used to be under, the Ottoman Empire, the Muslim Empire.
But
And
even then, like even during those era, I think like there was quite a lot of division, dude. Like look, what was the most united point in the Middle East history? Right, it was probably the Umayyads and the Abbasids. The
yes,
Abbasids probably more so,
yeah.
right? But
Mhm.
even within them, like the individual lords, right? The individual lords within each like each jurisdiction, each like individual, I guess, like jurisdiction within the Abbasid Caliphate, like throughout, like they had plenty of power, and they were rebellious. They were the caliph of the Abbasid Caliphate was basically many times just a puppet, right? And same goes for the Umayyads, because there were so many more other powerful, cunning, intelligent, talented individuals all around them who were able to basically manipulate them, right? So
Yeah.
and this caused a lot of divisions throughout their empire, right? So like even at that point, right? And it goes throughout history, like throughout history, all empires are like this, like big states who are ruling multiple ethnicities, multiple nations, basically struggle, right?
Yeah.
And things like the art of war, things like Chanakya, like these guides who have stood the test of time because they were applied by people who were in those situations, right? Where they were in those difficult situations, like it's they're valuable today because then we're able to see, okay, what lessons did they learn, what are their teachings, right? Because rather than it's a lot easier to be able to walk on their path than to try to cut your own path out, right?
Yeah.
And then you can innovate on top of that.
Yeah, and I definitely do see where you came from. Like when you were mentioning that, like, oh, there was some division that was going on, especially in the Ottoman Empire. I was even talking with some, like a guy the other day. He said, "Oh, I'm from Lebanese descent." I'm like, "Oh, when did your parents like immigrate?" He's like, "Oh no, my grandparents or great grandparents." Like, "Oh, that's pretty. You've been here. Like that means you've been here for a couple generations. What caused you guys to immigrate?" And then he's like, "Oh, the Ottoman Empire used to." Impose taxes on, Lebanese Christians, Syrian Christians. Back then, it wasn't Syrian Lebanon, but Arab Christians,
Right.
and that caused them to immigrate as well. So that there was some division, definitely, and you need to keep in mind that the Middle East is a very diverse area. There's the
Yeah.
Kurds, the Turks, the Israelis, the Palestinians, the Arabs.
Right. It's many different ethnicities merged together, right? Like it's so difficult to unite them. And that goes for every place on earth, really,
Yeah,
right?
but could unification in itself also be a burden as well? Like, because are just trying to unite. Like let's say, like hypothetically, the or the Ottoman Empire or the Muslim Empire were to reconquer all that territory, it would be pretty problematic, and that's why the
Yeah.
Soviet Union. You keep in mind that that's why the Soviet Union. One of the reasons why the Soviet Union collapsed was it couldn't hold on to that much territory and keep that control within because the Soviet Union was pretty
I
large.
mean, I don't know, man. Like I've heard the territorial argument before that if a country gets too big, it's too hard to control. Fine, but like the thing is, we're at a point in technology where, and especially like by the 1950s, right? Like
Mhm.
technology was good enough where you could control large swaths of land. I mean, look, the United States is one of the biggest countries on the planet. Like Alaska is like 4 times the size of Texas, and it's like its own thing, like far away from the rest of the country. right? And also like then within the United States, right, you have places like California, which are just, like so different from places like I don't know, like Georgia or whatever, right?
Well, you
Like
could argue that the economic opportunities in each state varies, and that like some of the maybe like Alaska economically, you could argue is not doing too well. Like, but
dude, they have
you
oil, they have gold. I mean, I know what you mean. Like for the perhaps their population is not as big, and not everyone in their state gets to enjoy the benefits of all those resources.
what I'm saying is that not all of the United States is going to be either economically or politically equal, even though there is federal
Yeah,
law.
but
Some states
yeah,
have different laws as
yeah,
well.
but that goes for any nation, any large country or any country really. Like not everything's gonna be equal, obviously. But what I'm saying is like I don't think size determines whether an empire is gonna or whether a
How
state is
powerful an empire
effective.
is or not.
No, not how powerful. Whether it's effective in ruling its people. I think if you have a lot of different types of people, obviously that's gonna be
That's what I was
there's a lot of
referring to.
interest. There's a lot of conflicting interests, right? And
Mhm.
you're gonna have to deal with that. You're gonna have to manage it. But I don't think that it necessarily means that you won't be able to. It's just gonna take more effort. Like
And no, well, what would you argue for someone who's trying to from a specific territory is trying to assume independence from that territory? Like, how could you unite that this particular like territory that's trying to become sovereign, even though the main country that's like like we can mention China and Taiwan. Taiwan wants to be independent. China's taken over Taiwan, and they're rejecting their calls for independence. Uh, in a way, like how could there's still that division between Taiwan and China. They're not united. So how
yeah,
would that?
because the Taiwanese government is a government in exile from China. So the Republic of China is basically Taiwan, and then the People's Republic of China is what mainland China is, right?
Yeah,
So so the government in Taiwan is in exile from China. So
exactly. But like,
yeah,
at the same time,
so
there like also with the how do you pronounce their names?
the
Uyghurs.
Uyghurs,
The Uyghurs. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, yeah. You could also argue there that they're not united with the Chinese government.
yeah, they're not.
Exactly. Yeah, and like
But China is doing every little tactic they can to make sure that they are able to control that territory, right?
well, that's not That's not unification at that point. That's more
What is unification? Unification is
unification.
can good.
No, no. I go ahead. I want to hear your point.
I think unification is just can you merge can you merge a territory and the people within your national political system, your economic system, social system,
So it doesn't
right?
have to be equal for those people in per se. It just has to kind of get them under the same belt in a way.
Eventually, it could become equal. But yeah, the basic purpose is to basically bring them under your umbrella, and then eventually you can and in your systems merge their systems with your systems, and eventually things may even out. I don't think that the way they're doing it is morally justifiable, but at the same time, like I'm not in their context, so I guess I'm not like who am I to judge that, right? Like that's their
Exactly, and I can't say too much because I'm not well informed about the whole situation going on in China and the different groups
it's pretty
there.
bad, dude. It's pretty bad.
Uh,
I'll
I'm
say that it's pretty bad.
I'll definitely have to do my research on that. But
Yeah,
for me, I know
but
I'm familiar with the Middle East because that's where I hail from. So
mm,
I do understand where you're coming from with like, okay, there are ways we can unify certain different ethnic religious groups. But at the same time, those groups are going to want sovereignty and they're going to want to rule over what it's a matter of
they'll
power.
have their own interests. So it doesn't just have to be sovereignty. It could simply be like, hey, uh, we want lower taxes on cotton, and someone can be like, nah, we want higher taxes on cotton, right? Like it could be something super petty. It could just be like, hey, we want access to this canal, or someone can be like, no, we want to build we want to build a dam on this river so that we can get more electricity. And then another state, another nation, which is like just downstream, would be like, hey, if we do that, we would have less water for our irrigation, right? So you can have conflicts in anything.
Yeah, and like I feel like that's more political than anything because that's dealing with more political elements rather than
I mean,
sovereignty.
nah, dude. Yeah, yeah. I mean, so sovereignty itself is a political element, right? It's a political movement, right? But like
But
this
that
is like
doesn't like classify like ethnicity and culture. It could also be just a political opinion. Like there's Republicans, Democrats. Then you can
yeah,
have
yeah,
different ethnic
sure,
groups and
yeah,
cultural groups mixed in within those
yeah,
two. It
yeah, of
doesn't have to
course.
be
I
like
mean, but
Democrats.
yeah, right. there's a lot more demographics than just like the surface. There's like layers and layers to each demographic, right?
Yeah, that's why I think complexity in any situation is important, and also to keep in mind like where can we meet at the table and like to meet their demands to the fullest extent, and but also meet our demands with each one just
You'll never be
agreeing
able to
on.
meet you'll never be able to meet anyone's demand to the fullest extent.
Well, no, not to the fullest extent, but like to a point that you guys can move forward. But then there's always going to be that, like that, that power lock in which they're like, okay, well, I don't want to negotiate with you, and then the other party's like, okay, you don't want to do what we want to do, then we're not going to negotiate. I've seen this time and time again, especially with Palestine and Israel. You know, yeah, they negotiations start. They start to this like talk about land borders and stuff, and the Palestinian government will mention something about Israeli settlements, and the the Israeli government will be like, and they'll be supportive of like they'll support that aspect of what the Jewish settlers are trying to do in the West Bank. They're like, no, no, this is for security, this is for this and that. The Palestinians are like, okay, then I don't want to negotiate. So that's why I mean, like, it's more political than just focus on the cultural social aspect of it. But I think focusing on the social aspect of any situation is important by bringing the two peoples together, either through economic cooperation or just through organizations to bring them together and to talk. I think then we can focus on the political side of it. But first of all, I think they focus on more of the social aspects, like how can we bring people together? How can we bring people on the same page, and not even just politicians, like everyday people, bring them to the table, let them cooperate, let them start businesses together, start doing business deals with each other, and build a society together, build instead of destroy. That's where I'm coming from.
Sure. But I think if you can get the leaders, if you want a resolution or something and the leaders are able to negotiate a resolution, I think the everyday people will follow.
But the leaders, that means that they're the representative of the people, and not all the people are going to agree that the leaders are the
Yeah,
representative of them.
yeah,
So that
sure. Ultimately, the leader is whoever finds himself in that particular situation, you know, as a decision maker. Sometimes a leader can be accidental, right? Or a leader could be someone who just forced his way to that power, or probably does not represent the interests of everyone. And the leader usually, generally speaking, will try to represent their own interests in any negotiation, right? Like if you're coming from Palestine, if you're coming from Israel, right, and if whatever the negotiations somehow harm your personal interests, most likely you're gonna be like, nah, I'm not going for this. I want to be in a situation where I'm still in benefit, and and yeah, if and everything else is an extra bonus.
and it like it's about winning, and then the day of power control. Like in the art of the war, that the main goal is to win the war and to assume power. But you also need to keep in mind the many other elements, such as morality. What were some of the other ones? I can't really.
I mean, yeah, it's ultimately about winning. You're right, and there's there's factors that go into it, right? And he talks about heaven, earth. I think what is it? Time, day, night, morality, what you call it, energy. There are a few different things it talks about, but yeah, yeah. But overall, man, I think it's been a pretty good episode.
Yeah,
Overall,
yeah.
yeah,
I
we
think
hit
we've
like well
talked
over the
about a
hour
lot.
mark. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
Who's your next guest? If you want to give the preview.
So we're bringing a guy that I know, and I've been acquaintances with him for quite a while. His name is called Ransom Fox. He's been working with, I believe he's an aspiring politician. He, has worked with campaigns for Andrew Yang and Harold Peon. Andrew Yang was a presidential candidate, I believe, during
Yeah,
the
yeah,
last
yeah, yeah.
election, and I think
Last
he's
one,
running
yeah.
for New York mayor, or governor. I forgot what he was running for, but yeah. So we're gonna be talking to him next time to see like some of his political beliefs, some of the things we believe we could change in the U.S. to make us more unified rather than divided. Some policy changes that he would like to see done. We're just going to talk a lot about politics, and also he has experience in the entrepreneurial field too. He has his own podcast, and I feel like he'll be definitely an interesting person to talk to.
Cool.
So I'm really excited about that.
Sounds good.
Yeah, right, Reese. Thank you for joining me, man. I really appreciate it, and yeah.